Hey there, thanks for tuning into Duckbricks. I'm Chris, and the day has finally come. Avatar: The Last Airbender is now streaming on Netflix, the live action show. I'm about to go see it, but before we do that, I figured why not take a closer look at the two somewhat strange LEGO Avatar: The Last Airbender sets that we actually got from LEGO officially all the way back in 06 and 07. Now, I'm gonna be honest, these sets, they're not good. These came from an era of LEGO where they were really prioritizing just coming up with just very basic, large builds that weren't very stable, but really just tried to look good on a shelf. Thankfully, LEGO has pivoted away from that methodology ever since, but this was particularly an era of LEGO where minifigure designs were whack, the builds were very strange and very fragile, and to be honest, these sets didn't do so well. In fact, the reason why we only ever got two Avatar: The Last Airbender LEGO sets is because they launched them at the same time as the SpongeBob sets, and literally just said, well, whichever one sells better, we'll continue making. And obviously, SpongeBob did better than Avatar, mostly because the sets were a little bit more colorful and bright and kind of appealed to that younger audience, but because of that, these are the only two LEGO Avatar: The Last Airbender sets we have ever gotten, and we're gonna take a look at them right now to commemorate the release of the live-action TV show. And so, without further ado, let's jump on in and take a look. Alright, so here is the entirety of the LEGO Avatar: The Last Airbender wave that we got in 2006. And when I say wave, I mean two sets, and yeah, two sets is all we ever got. This is set number 3828 Air Temple. It retailed for $30 US and came with 400 pieces, but adjusting for inflation, that's about $45 today. And this is set number 3829 Fire Nation Ship. It retailed for $50, came with 722 pieces, which adjusted for inflation retails for around $76 today. Both of these sets, given that they were the only two Avatar: The Last Airbender sets we ever got from LEGO and maybe will ever get in the future, are now incredibly expensive on the secondhand market. The larger set is worth around $300 to $400 on Bricklink right now, and the smaller one is around $200 to $300, which really goes to show that people are desperate for more Avatar: The Last Airbender sets. So if people want Avatar: The Last Airbender LEGO so much, why didn't LEGO make any more sets, and why won't LEGO accept any future LEGO Ideas proposals for the theme to make a return? Well, there's a couple reasons, and LEGO Avatar: The Last Airbender has a pretty interesting history. As we jump in, I just want to take a closer look at the two sets, but first I did want to cover a little bit of the history behind why this theme did not do so well, and why LEGO was pretty reluctant to work with Nickelodeon ever again. So basically, in 2006, Nickelodeon just signed a partnership with LEGO, and they were considering making sets off of two of their shows. One of them was, of course, Avatar: The Last Airbender, and the other one was SpongeBob. So what LEGO did was that in 2006, they put out two very small waves of sets. SpongeBob got 3 sets, and Avatar got 2 sets, and they basically stacked the two properties against each other to see how well they would perform. Now, what may not come as a huge surprise to really anybody, SpongeBob outperformed LEGO Avatar sets by a wide margin. It was not even close. The LEGO Avatar: The Last Airbender sets languished on store shelves, nobody really was that interested in getting them, whereas SpongeBob became a best-selling hit. And so, LEGO made what seemed to be the very easy decision at the time, which was, well, no longer make any more Avatar: The Last Airbender sets, and instead just focus all of their Nickelodeon budget and efforts on SpongeBob, which, to be honest, at the time, was probably the most fiscally responsible decision. Now, there is one other thing that I do need to point out here. As you're probably noticing from the composition of the builds, from the way things are put together, from the wacky and weird graphic design of the characters, these sets came out at an era of LEGO when they were producing sets that really tried to prioritize size and impressiveness on a shelf or on a box versus actually being, well, good toys. What do I mean by being a good toy? Well, if you look at a LEGO set nowadays, it's incredibly sturdy, you could drop it and it probably won't break that much, and everything has a purpose, every single piece is fantastically sculpted, the entire models are always very well put together, and because of that, LEGO models might be pretty expensive today, but for the most part, a lot of those pieces goes into making small and fine detail, as well as making the builds just good to put together, good builds to play around with, and just good builds to put on a shelf.
That is not the mentality LEGO had in 2006. And if you look at all of the sets that came out around the 2005 to 2007 era, but especially in 2006, LEGO had this kind of issue where they wanted to just get the biggest bang for your buck. Throwing stability and even aesthetics out of the window, they were just trying to figure out, okay, how many large pieces can we cram into a set just to make it look large and visually impressive, but maybe not necessarily be the most stable or the most fun to play with. And that's why LEGO sets in 2006 honestly are some of the worst the company has ever produced, because they had this shift in mentality where they were trying to just go bigger and bolder with every single LEGO set and kind of throwing out aesthetics and functionality. If you look at these two sets, maybe from a distance you can kind of see the silhouettes of what they're supposed to be. You can see the silhouette of a temple, you can see this is supposed to be a boat, but as you actually go in closer, you may notice that the details are incredibly blocky. The builds are incredibly simple. This is just stacking a ton of gray bricks together. The entire front column is basically just a big rectangle. And now you may say, well, that's kind of what the boat looks like in universe, right? If you look at a picture of the Fire Nation ship, it kind of looks like this in the animation, but it definitely doesn't excuse the way that LEGO was really just trying to prioritize these very simplified and bulky builds. Look at the way the front of the hull is sculpted. In a set that came out today, LEGO would absolutely either use a pre-molded hull, or they would actually have a very nicely crafted side of the boat, kind of like what they do with the Ninjago Destiny's Bounties today, where you have a very interesting type of studs on the side technique to have all of the panels of the boat feel smooth. But in 2006, LEGO didn't really care about that. It just simply wasn't the company's focus to make products that were really educational to build, products that required a lot of pieces but looked good in the end. No, the focus was on making the prices of these sets as low as possible while giving you as big of a model as possible. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, it's just a completely different way the company was operating at that time. Now for some themes, this really worked. If you look at LEGO Exoforce, Exoforce does a lot on a small parts budget. You could get a massive mech or a massive base that doesn't have a lot of depth to it, but if you look at the builds themselves, they're pretty hollow, they're pretty empty, and they're very, very fragile. But it worked for the Exoforce aesthetic. For Avatar: The Last Airbender, it's a little bit trickier to do it, especially with the subject matter they chose. One of which being a very solid boat, but a large dark gray boat that honestly doesn't even look that interesting on shelves. It's very colorless, it really is literally just dark gray, black, light gray, and maybe a little hint of transparent red. But basically, mostly just black and dark gray, which maybe works for a Star Wars spaceship if the actual shaping is interesting and it looks cool to swoosh around, but the shaping is not that interesting on a boat like this. And then for the Air Temple, it's an okay build, but compared to the much more colorful builds that we got for SpongeBob, with the entire Bikini Bottom area, and the fact that the temple itself honestly doesn't really have that much going for it as soon as you take a look at the interior, it's easy to see why these sets perform so poorly compared to the SpongeBob sets, which were in comparison a lot more vibrant, more colorful, and just stood out more on shelves to younger kids who wanted to play with them. In fact, the only splash of color that I'm seeing from both these sets here is really just the outfits of the characters here, and that's basically it. Aang's outfit is very colorful, it's bright yellow and red, but it's really the only thing they've got going for it. If you look at the other builds, you have a tan temple and a very, very just dark gray and black ship. Am I saying they should have chosen other things to focus on for Avatar: The Last Airbender? Maybe. I think that if they instead decided to focus on maybe making the Air Temple the larger set and then doing a smaller set for a buildable Appa the Sky Bison, that would have been a really solid build because people would have loved to swoosh it around and play with it. But I also don't know if LEGO could have pulled it off in 2006. Either it would end up looking like an unholy abomination, or just something super blocky and barely resembling Appa at all, so I'm almost kind of glad they didn't do it because I wouldn't want that to be the definitive official LEGO set version of Appa if it was just something they would have made in 2006. But enough about the overview. I just want to dive into the sets themselves, starting off with the minifigures, because the minifigures are some of the most interesting parts of the theme. I'm going to start off with Aang, of course, who is the main character of Avatar: The Last Airbender, and it's really interesting because obviously Star Wars fans will know that LEGO was doing a lot of interesting things when depicting animated characters in LEGO form, especially around the 2006 era. In 2008, we got these wacky faces for Star Wars The Clone Wars that was meant to match the animation style, and they also gave us these very interesting and wacky faces for the Avatar The Last Airbender sets to make them actually feel like they were characters in the show and didn't really follow the traditional LEGO design. This was also a time period of LEGO where they were getting more comfortable with printing the top of minifigure heads, where you can see Sokka here has pretty much just his hair printed on the very top of his head and no hairpiece whatsoever, which is not really something LEGO does anymore, but it definitely reflects a different time in LEGO's history, especially when they were doing it a ton for the LEGO sports and NBA players. I'm gonna be completely honest, I don't actually mind this that much. A lot of people do not like the style of these minifigures, and would I have preferred it if they went with the traditional LEGO style? Yes, absolutely. I think it is definitely a good decision for LEGO to, going forwards, adapt cartoon material in standard LEGO styles. Future Star Wars The Clone Wars sets we've gotten have pretty much just been in the standard LEGO style, and even other cartoons that LEGO has adapted like Star Wars Rebels have solved the problem because they also are not completely exaggerated or cartoony, they just have a pretty standard LEGO face. But I will say this is maybe the one exception. I feel like this face print for Aang actually does really capture his character quite well. You have a wide smile, you have a very expressive face, and overall, I'm pretty happy with this minifigure. Sure, the printing is very simple, there's no back printing, but it doesn't really need it. He is a character in a very simplified kind of 2D drawn cartoon, and it totally works for his features. But I cannot say the same about the other characters on the list. Before we move on to those though, I do want to point out we do get his glider in one of the sets, which is actually pretty nice. I like that they were able to print the glider on these kind of special vinyl pieces, which they've used in the past for sails, and it works pretty well. I think this is actually a pretty good representation of his glider. The other thing they did, which was kind of using a transparent, clear, large dish to represent the air powers, was okay for its time, but personally, I prefer to upgrade my Avatar The Last Airbender figures by just including special power blast and effect elements that they've introduced in the many years prior to this theme coming out, such as this transparent clear ice blast piece, which totally works as a gust of wind if you want to see it that way. But moving onwards to the other side characters, unfortunately, they are not captured nearly as well as Aang is. Katara here is nearly unrecognizable. I get what they were trying to do with the printed hairpiece kind of looping around the head itself, but something about the facial print is just really uncanny about the way that they've actually done the graphic design of this. Whereas the cartoon design worked for Aang because he's very expressive and he has these very large eyes and it definitely feels like the character itself, this one feels like they were just pushing it a little bit too far in the cartoon aesthetic, especially because Katara is a little bit more of a subdued character compared to Aang, and this facial expression just doesn't really work for me for the character. The torso design is fine, it's nothing super crazy, and the hairpiece they used is pretty much just the best they could do at the time, but yeah, these minifigures are really, really weird, and part of this is why I would love for LEGO to revisit the theme, because these minifigures are definitely products of their time. I think the clearest example of this is Sokka here, who's gotten a very strange treatment with the top of his head having this very strange hairprint that kind of shows the exposed stud, almost making it look like he's bald, which he absolutely is not. The facial expression has his signature smirk, which I think works okay for the character, but it still feels a little bit weird. It still feels very much in the uncanny valley when you compare it to other LEGO minifigure heads. It's nice that we did get printed legs, but the blue on brown printing isn't quite as clear, especially when compared to the actual blue, and don't even get me started on the yellow on brown printing for Aang here, because that is just completely not the right color. Overall, I can see LEGO definitely tried to depict these characters, and in 2006, this was probably the best we were going to get, but again, not really a huge fan of the way they